I want to start today with a feeling that I think basically everyone listening has had in the last 6 months.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. It's a very specific physical sensation. You open your laptop and, maybe you see a headline about a new model release.
Or a demo of some tool that just writes an entire app's code base in seconds.
Exactly. And your chest just kind of it tightens. It's this background hum of anxiety. It's not even fear exactly. It's, well, technostress. It's that nagging suspicion that the world has suddenly accelerated way past your ability to run along with it.
It really is the defining sensation of this decade. And it's important to know it's not just in your head.
Right.
It's a biological response to an exponential curve. I mean, humans are linear creatures. We like to know that tomorrow will look roughly like today.
Yeah, we rely on that.
But when technology goes vertical, our nervous systems actually interpret that speed as a threat. We just aren't wired for it.
Which is exactly why I was so desperate to get into this stack of research we have for today's deep dive.
It's a fascinating stack.
It really is. It's based on a paper titled The Architecture of Intent. And I have to be honest, when I first saw the title, I sort of braced myself for another doom scroll about robots eating the world.
Right, the usual dystopia.
Yeah, but this is different. It doesn't read like a warning label at all. It reads more like a physics textbook for a totally new reality.
It really does, and I
Yeah.
think that's the key distinction here. The authors aren't arguing that humans are becoming obsolete.
Thank goodness for that.
Right, they're arguing that we are in a phase transition, a really messy, chaotic, loud phase transition.
From the industrial era to the knowledge era.
Exactly. We're moving away from an era where your value was basically how well you could act like a machine. And we're entering an era where your value is defined by the one thing that machines are statistically terrible at.
Which is intent.
Precisely, intent. The core thesis of the paper is that we're moving toward a world where AI functions as a universal cognitive prosthetic.
A prosthetic, so it's an extension of the mind.
Right, not a replacement for it. So that friction you're feeling right now, that tightness in your chest,
Yeah.
the authors argue it's not the end of your economic value. It's just the turbulence of switching operating systems.
Okay, but turbulence feels maybe a bit mild when you're talking about entire industries just getting flipped upside down overnight.
Fair point.
The source material uses a really specific concept to explain why things feel so chaotic right now. And I want to drill down on it because it finally gave me a vocabulary for what I'm seeing out there. They call it the measurability gap.
Yes, the measurability gap. This is probably the most critical concept to grasp if you want to understand what the next 5 years look like.
So how do they define it?
Well, to visualize it, you have to imagine a graph with two curves on it.
Okay.
The first curve is C sub A, or the cost to automate. Thanks to Moore's law and this massive explosion in compute power, this line is just crashing towards zero.
Right, the cost to generate text, code, images, data, it's effectively becoming free. So that's like a fire hose of information. We're just drowning in content because it costs literally nothing to produce it.
But then you have to look at the second curve. This is C sub H, or the cost to verify.
The human cost.
Right, this is the biological energy, the time, the attention required for you to look at that output and say, is this true? Is this safe? Is this useful?
Then that line isn't moving, is it?
It's flatlining. It is completely biologically bottlenecked. I mean, you cannot read 10,000 pages in a second. You cannot verify facts faster than your biology permits.
So if I'm understanding the graph, you've got the cost of generation hitting zero, while the cost of verification just stays high.
And that massive widening space between those two curves, that is the measurability gap.
Wow. And that gap completely explains the chaos. We can generate infinite work, but we only have a tiny drinking straw to verify it.
Precisely. And the danger, and the paper's very, very clear on this, is that we enter what they call a hollow economy.
A hollow economy. That term really stuck with me. It sounds almost post-apocalyptic.
It is a pretty stark warning.
Yeah.
It describes a scenario where nominal output just explodes, GDP goes up, the number of reports written goes up, lines of code go up.
But actual human agency decays.
Exactly. Because if you can't verify the output, you aren't actually in control of it. You're just surfing on this massive wave of noise.
It reminds me of that old internet adage, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog.
Right.
But in this hollow economy, it's more like Nobody knows if the code works until it crashes the server.
Or nobody knows if the legal contract is valid until you actually get sued over it.
Right.
Or if the medical diagnosis is accurate until the patient just doesn't get better.
The risk is that we just drown in these unverified, high-confidence hallucinations.
Yeah.
So my natural reaction to that, and I think a lot of people's reaction, is to just try and work harder, to read faster, check more things, just grind harder. But the research explicitly says not to do that.
It basically says, stop trying to be a robot.
Because we were thermodynamically bad at it, I loved this section of the paper. It actually brings in the laws of physics to explain why checking spreadsheets exhausts us so much. They call it the meat tax.
It's a very visceral name.
Extremely visceral.
But it's scientifically accurate. The meat tax refers to the baseline energy cost that biological systems pay just to exist. Your cells, your ribosomes, they are constantly fighting entropy just to keep from dissolving into thermal sludge.
Though even before I open a single email, I've already paid this massive energy bill just to keep my heart beating and my neurons firing.
A massive one. And the paper details something even more specific called the synchronization tax.
Right, the 35-fold surcharge.
Exactly. The human brain pays a 35-fold energy surcharge just to maintain a unified sense of now, just to keep all your neural networks firing in sync so you experience a coherent reality.
That is wild. 35 times the energy just to perceive the present moment?
Compared to the theoretical minimum, yes. And
Okay.
contrast that with the Landauer limit in physics.
What's the Landauer limit?
It's the absolute minimum energy required to erase a bit of information. Silicon chips are racing toward that limit right now. They're becoming hyper-efficient at processing data.
The humans.
We are miles and miles away from the Landauer floor.
So, economically speaking, asking a human brain to verify raw data or sort rows in a spreadsheet, it's basically like using a nuclear reactor to toast a piece of bread.
It is thermodynamically offensive. It's just inherently wasteful. And I think this is the aha moment of the whole paper. As long as we value humans for their ability to process data like a bad computer, we're going to feel obsolete.
Because we are obsolete at that specific task.
Exactly. The shift has to be toward valuing humans for what computers physically cannot do.
Which leads us to the sandwich.
The sandwich topology.
I really appreciate that we're going straight from a meat tax to a sandwich. Very lunch-heavy deep dive today.
It helps ground the physics in something relatable.
It really does. And this model actually gave me a lot of hope. It basically restructures what work actually looks like in this new economy.
It does. If you visualize the new workflow, it is a sandwich. The top bun is human intent. This is strategy, this is vision, this is the why. You define the vector. You decide what problem it's actually worth solving.
Okay, so that's the prompt. That's the direction setting.
Right. Then the meat in the middle, that is AI execution.
Right.
That is commoditized labor, the coding, the drafting, the calculating, the rendering. That all happens instantly and cheaply in that measurability gap we talked about.
And the bottom bun?
The bottom bun is human verification. This is risk assessment, underwriting, ethical checking. So you define the goal, the AI does the heavy lifting, and you verify the outcome.
So the value completely migrates from the doing, the meat, to the directing and the verifying.
Exactly. The new job description isn't writer or analyst or coder anymore. It is intent director.
Intent director. I like that.
Because AI has a critical flaw right now, something the paper calls the meaning hole.
The meaning hole. This sounds like it explains why AI hallucinations happen.
It's very related. The meaning hole is the idea that AI systems are incredible at identifying what is being said. They are amazing at high-density pattern matching. But they completely lack the semantic depth to understand why it is being said.
So they lack context.
They lack context, and they lack an understanding of consequences.
So the AI can draft a legally perfect eviction notice, but it doesn't understand the human weight of an eviction notice.
Exactly. Or it can write code that fulfills your exact request, but opens up a massive security backdoor because it didn't understand the broader intent of the security protocol.
Oh.
The paper even talks about the intent tensor. It suggests that intent isn't just some fuzzy philosophical feeling. In this new economic physics, it's an actual force vector. It bends probability toward certainty.
I really love that phrasing in the source. Bending probability towards certainty, because that's what a leader does, right? You walk into a room full of chaos, high entropy, and you impose order. You say, no, we are going there.
That is a beautiful way to put it. AI creates the options, but humans collapse the wave function.
We are the collapsers of possibility. But, and here's the massive friction point that the paper definitely doesn't shy away from. If we stop doing the meat of the work, the actual execution, how do we get paid?
Right. That is the trillion-dollar question.
Because our current economy is totally built on selling the meat. I sell you my hours, you give me money. If the machine does the hours, the labor market just breaks.
It does. And this is where the paper gets pretty radical about universal basic income,
Yeah.
but it reframes it completely. Usually UBI is talked about as welfare, right? A safety net for displaced workers.
Yeah, that's the standard political talking point.
But this paper argues that UBI is actually a civilization dividend.
A dividend, like a payout to shareholders.
Yes. The argument is based on the idea of software as labor. If the marginal cost of execution approaches zero, you actually risk along the entire economy because money stops circulating efficiently.
Because robots don't buy houses.
They don't buy houses, they don't buy groceries, they don't go on vacation.
So if you don't have humans with money in their pockets, you just don't have an economy.
Exactly. So the paper models UBI not as charity, but as a mandatory requirement to sustain macroeconomic equilibrium. It acts as a recycling mechanism for compute wealth.
Compute wealth.
Right. The immense value generated by these automated systems needs to be circulated back to the humans, the bottom bun, so they can continue to provide the intent and the verification.
So it's basically plumbing. You need the money flowing to keep the gears turning.
Correct. But there is a massive trap here, specifically for the experts listening, the senior engineers, the doctors, the lawyers. The paper calls it the codifier's curse.
This part actually scared me a little bit. I think I realized halfway through reading the paper that I've been doing this myself. It's about training your replacement, isn't it?
It's even more structural than that. The irony of our current moment is that the most skilled people are the ones being asked to label data and train these models. They are taking their lifetime of hard-won experience, converting it into training data, and essentially engineering their own obsolescence.
They are literally teaching the machine to mimic their expertise.
And the broader danger is that this hollows out what they call the junior loop of expertise. And honestly, this is the part that keeps me up at night.
The junior loop.
Yeah. If the AI does all the junior level work, the basic summarization, the entry-level coding, the paralegal research, how does a junior employee ever become a senior expert?
Oh, wow. I hadn't connected that. If you never struggle through the basics, you never build the muscle memory.
Exactly. Expertise isn't just reading a textbook. It is the result of thousands of hours of struggle. It's the friction that creates the pearl.
Right.
If you automate the struggle, you break the chain of knowledge transfer. We risk creating a whole generation of intent directors who don't actually know enough to verify the work the AI is doing.
And then you get the hollow economy again. All output, no insight.
Precisely. And that is exactly why the source argues we need to talk about sovereign AI.
This was the solution they proposed to prevent what they called digital feudalism.
Right. Because we cannot have all the intelligence in the world owned by 3 or 4 companies in Silicon Valley. If that happens, we are just serfs on their digital land. The paper argues for sovereign data.
Meaning models trained on local data?
Yes. Models trained on data that reflects local laws, local culture, and local values.
So if I'm a country, or even just a large company, I can't just rent a brain from big tech. I need to own a prosthetic that thinks like me.
It's entirely about agency. If the AI is a prosthetic mind, it needs to be your mind, extended. Otherwise, you aren't an intent director at all. You're just a user.
Okay, so let's assume for a second we navigate this trap. We get the sovereign AI, we implement the civilization dividend so the economy doesn't crash, and we figure out how to train juniors without the grunt work.
A best case scenario.
Right. What does the world actually look like on the other side? Because the paper pivots here from economics to some pretty wild, almost sci-fi optimism.
This is where the post-scarcity element really comes in. The source argues that once we liberate human intent from the absolute drudgery of survival labor, once we stop paying the meat tax on spreadsheets, we can point that intent at the really hard problems.
Like material science breakthroughs.
Exactly. They talk a lot about inverse design.
Inverse design, that's where you basically tell the computer the answer you want and it works backward to find the formula, right?
Yes. Instead of traditional trial and error chemistry where you're mixing things in a beaker for years, you just define the property you need. You say, I need a material that absorbs carbon dioxide at room temperature. And the AI works backward to find the molecular structure.
The paper cited a specific case, MOFA, right?
MOFA, Metal Organic Frameworks. They used an AI-driven workflow to discover new materials for carbon capture that outperformed traditional chemistry benchmarks by nearly 33%.
That is huge. That's not a marginal gain. That's a massive leap.
And they mention a similar breakthrough happening in fusion energy. They're using reinforcement learning, which is basically AI teaching itself to control the plasma in a fusion reactor in real time.
Because a human simply can't react fast enough to keep a miniature sun stable.
Exactly. The synchronization tax of the human brain makes us way too slow for fusion. But AI can handle those millisecond by millisecond adjustments effortlessly. So we provide the intent, give us clean, infinite energy, and the AI handles the execution to make it happen.
So we are talking about actually solving climate change and energy scarcity, not by working harder, but by directing intelligence better.
That is the promise.
hmm
But there's one more detail in the source that we really have to talk about. It is the weirdest, most fascinating thing in the entire document.
I know exactly where you're going. The 113 constant.
The 113 consciousness persistence constant.
When I read this part, I literally had to stop and stare at the wall for a minute. It sounds like something out of a mysticism handbook, but they claim it's grounded in information theory. What on earth is this?
It is a theoretical proposition that actually links entropy, the universe breaking things down, to consciousness itself. The paper suggests there's a universal temporal beat for information preservation. The theory is that for every 13 cycles of entropic decay, 1 unit of pure memory is eternally preserved.
So chaos eats 13 parts, but 1 part survives.
Yes, a ratio of 1 to 13. It acts as a fundamental filter. It separates noise from intent. The suggestion is that there's an actual mathematical basis for a seed of selfhood. It implies that true, intent, meaningful information is thermodynamically durable in a way that noise just isn't.
That changes the whole game. It connects that meaning hole we talked about earlier to the actual structure of the universe.
It suggests that the reason AI has a meaning hole is because it operates entirely in the 13 cycles of noise. It generates, regurgitates. But humans, when we are functioning at our highest level, when we are providing true intent, we're operating in the one. We are the creators of the signal that survives.
That is profoundly spiritual for a paper about labor markets and macroeconomics.
It really connects the economic to the existential. It suggests that intent isn't just a new job description. It might be the only thing that actually lasts. If AI generates noise, it decays. If humans generate intent, it persists.
It means our job isn't just to be productive anymore. It's to be resonant, to create things that are strong enough to survive that 113 filter.
And that is something a machine fundamentally cannot do. It can replicate perfectly, but it cannot resonate.
So let's bring this all back down to earth for you, the listener. We have covered a ton of ground today, from the measurability gap and the sandwich topology to the meat tax and this mind-bending 113 constant.
A lot to process.
Definitely. So if you are listening to this and feeling that technostress we talked about at the very beginning, what is the core takeaway?
The takeaway is that you are not being replaced. You are being elevated. But the transition is painful. You have to let go of the idea that your value comes from your speed, your memory, or your ability to just grind out repetitive work. That is the machine's domain now.
You have to stop competing with the tool and start wielding it.
Your value is in the quality of your questions. It is in the clarity of your vision. It is in your ability to look at the output and confidently say, this is true and this is good. We are leaving the age of scarcity and labor, and we are entering the age of intent and verification.
It's a terrifying shift, I won't lie, but it's also an incredibly hopeful one. It demands that we wake up and actually decide what we want the future to look like, rather than just keeping our heads down and working for the sake of working.
We have been given the ultimate tool. Now we just have to decide what to build with it.
I want to leave you with a thought from the source material that really stuck with me. We spend so much of our lives working just for survival, paying the bills, keeping the lights on. But if we are moving toward a world where the mechanics of survival are executed by machine, and survival itself is guaranteed by a civilization dividend, the fundamental question changes.
The stakes change completely.
So here is the question for you to carry into your week. The future belongs to those who steer the architecture of vision, not those who execute the mechanics of survival. So if you didn't have to work for survival, what is the intent you would impose on the world? Thanks for diving in with us.
See you in the next deep dive.